Patrol 911.
Someone's trying to break into my house.
What city are you in? St. Paul?
I'm in St. Paul.
Hang on just a second. What address are you at?
1794.
1794 what?
911, where's your emergency?
Stay with
1794. Minnehaha Avenue.
Minnehaha. Someone's trying west?
Okay, what phone number are you calling from?
Well, I don't know where she went there. 651-494-4876.
All right, we'll try to give her a call back.
Thanks.
State Patrol 911.
Please, somebody has broken out and shot me.
Okay, are you in St. Paul, sir?
What's the problem?
When I was shot, somebody broke into their house. I've been shot.
You've been shot?
Yes, please.
Okay, stay on the phone with me, okay?
Okay.
What's your name? What's
No.
Nick?
No.
Nick?
Yeah.
Stay on the phone with me. Who shot you?
I have a son broke into that house. No.
Okay, stay on the phone with me, okay? Do not hang up. Nick? 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 Nick, listen to me. I've got help coming. I need you to take a deep breath. Is the person that shot you still there?
No, yeah, there's that.
Okay. Take a deep breath and listen to me. What race was he?
I don't know.
Okay, do you remember what he was wearing? Do you remember what he was wearing?
No, like a hooded sweatshirt.
A hooded sweatshirt?
I don't know.
Okay.
My wife she's dead. I need something here now.
You said your wife is shot also?
Yeah, she's not moving. She's not breathing. Oh, please, lady. No.
Stay with me.
6 minutes into the second 911 call, police arrived at 1794 Minnehaha Avenue in St. Paul, Minnesota, and walked into a violent and bloody crime scene. Upon entering the home, officers immediately smelled a strong odor of gunpowder and spotted a double-barrel shotgun on the floor, right behind the front door. Just a few more feet into the house, they found a man and a woman lying on the floor, each with a gunshot wound. The man, who was still on the phone with 911, had a visible wound on his left leg and was hysterical. Right next to him was a woman lying on her back on the kitchen floor with blood covering her hair and face. She was shot in her back and was unresponsive. As emergency responders provided life-saving measures to the woman, the man was removed from the home and placed in an ambulance to be rushed to a hospital. He tells officers that just minutes prior, he heard someone trying to break into his house, then got out of bed, grabbed his shotgun and woke his wife up so they could escape through the back door. He said that as they were running to the garage, the intruder broke in and tried to wrestle the shotgun out of his hand and in the process, shot him and his wife. Within a matter of minutes, the neighborhood was swarmed with law enforcement, while detectives rushed to start processing the crime scene inside the house. When officers arrived at the scene, they found the door slightly open. 2 spent shotgun shells were found on the floor. In the door frame were tool marks by the doorknob, consistent with someone having attempted to break in, but no marks were found by the deadbolt. The door had shotgun pellets embedded in it from one of the shots, and the floor mat was slightly out of place. A pair of men's blue jeans were sitting on the floor right by the entrance to the kitchen, where the woman was lying. The victims were identified as 27-year-old Nicholas Firkus and his 25-year-old wife, Heidi. Nick and Heidi had been married for about 5 years after they met for the first time at their local church. They were active members in their community and each led a church youth group, taking on roles of mentors to kids and taking them on camping trips throughout Minnesota. Friends of theirs described them as a fun-loving and happy couple. Nick made a living by managing his family's upholstery and carpet cleaning business, while Heidi worked at a financial services company. At the time, they lived in a modest house in the quiet residential neighborhood of Midway, which they were paying a mortgage on. Every Sunday morning, Nick and Heidi were found attending church together, but on this Sunday, their friends noticed that they weren't there. Nick was at a hospital being treated for his gunshot wound, and Heidi was pronounced dead at the scene. Nick's wound turned out to be non-life-threatening, and doctors were able to treat him and have him discharged within 3 hours. By 10:15 a.m., less than 4 hours after the 911 calls were made to police, Nick was brought down to a police station to be questioned. Police are now conducting a homicide investigation, but they haven't yet told Nick that his wife is deceased. Over the course of this interview, the detective interviewing Nick will start to notice some red flags in his story.
I know this is a very traumatic situation, okay? And I'm just going to try and ease into it, okay? So what I'd like to do is just try to kind of backtrack a little bit, try and go back 24 hours or so.
Yeah.
We can start on Saturday.
Nick tells police that on the night prior, he and Heidi each had a glass of wine as they watched a movie together, before they both went to bed at around midnight. He says that he woke up at his usual time that morning, at around 6 a.m., went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water, then crawled back into bed with Heidi, before suddenly, he started hearing a noise coming from downstairs.
All right, so you hear the screen door open?
Yeah.
All right.
So I kind of let it go for a little while, but then I started fiddling with our doorknob.
And what are they doing? Are they just going like this?
Yeah.
Kind of like that?
Yeah, just shaking the knob and
Okay.
shutting the door.
And is Heidi still sleeping then?
Yeah,
Okay.
like a rock.
Nick says that he grabbed his shotgun and loaded it with 2 rounds, then woke up Heidi, telling her that someone was breaking into the house and that they needed to leave. While Heidi was on the phone with 911, they both made their way down the stairs to get to the garage, with Heidi leading the way. Just as they made it past the front door at the bottom of the stairs, someone came bursting in through the door.
And so I try to shove the door shut, but it gets forced open. And the guy that was there, I think he saw it. I think he grabbed the barrel.
What did this guy look like? Is he a white guy, black guy, Asian guy?
I think he was a black guy with a dark hooded sweatshirt that was drawn up pretty tight.
Yeah.
But I did not get a good look because I was looking for Heidi and trying to wrestle the gun away so we could bail.
Nick describes the intruder as a 6'1" black man weighing over 200 pounds and says that as soon as he entered the house, the man grabbed Nick's shotgun and tried to wrestle it out of his hand before the gun suddenly went off.
Okay. And it goes off down?
Yeah, I mean, I know it hit Heidi. I know it did.
Okay.
I know it did. I don't know where it hit her, but I know it
Did it hit her in the chest, the back?
She was running away, so he definitely hit her in the back.
Hit her in the back?
Yeah.
Her back or the back of her head?
I don't know. It wasn't low. I don't think it was a high shot, but it was.
Take your time. It's okay.
Heidi drops face first to the floor as Nick continues wrestling with the intruder.
And that's what went off the second time and hit me in the leg.
So where does it hit you in the leg? The left leg?
My wound is right here.
So you shoot yourself then, or is this?
I don't know if it was me, myself, or if it was the guy. I honestly don't remember at that time. He could have pulled it or I could have pulled it. I don't remember.
After the second shot, Nick falls to the floor and the intruder takes off.
What happens next then?
He's gone.
He takes off up on the track?
I fall down. He's gone.
All right. Now, are you bleeding a lot, or?
I don't even know. I know I fell. I got to Heidi and I had to redial 911 and just started freaking out.
The first major red flag was raised after Nick was asked about his marriage and finances. While nothing immediately stood out about his marriage, Nick admits that he and Heidi were in some serious financial trouble. They had credit card debt piling up, thousands of dollars in overdraft fees, and haven't paid their mortgage in almost 2 years.
You guys aren't behind in the bills or anything?
We are behind in the bills, which is a little stressful. In fact, we were planning on moving tomorrow.
Nick reveals that their house had been foreclosed on and that he and Heidi were actually being evicted the very next day.
We foreclosed on our house.
Okay.
We have to be out by Monday. Tomorrow.
Well, that's kind of close notice.
It is, and I think the reason is because we're both kind of dealing with the shame of the whole thing, because we're embarrassed.
Nick says that neither his nor Heidi's family and friends have any idea that they were in financial trouble. When detectives looked through the house, it seemed that neither did Heidi. The sheriff's office was scheduled to arrive at their house at noon the very next day and forcefully remove them both from the property if they haven't already left. But there were no signs that Nick and Heidi were packing up or planning to move out anytime soon. The refrigerator and the pantry were still stocked with food, all of the furniture was still in place, and their closets were still filled with clothes. This seems odd to the detective, and he confronts Nick about it.
You know, I came to the house and I saw some boxes in the dining room area.
Yeah.
There weren't a lot of boxes there.
There's a whole bunch in the basement.
A whole bunch in the basement?
Mhm.
Okay.
And then we were going to go to Home Depot and buy a whole bunch more.
I've moved out of houses before, and I've helped friends move out of houses before too, Nick. And it just seems like you're kind of, putting yourself against the clock. I mean, if you knew this train was coming, you kind of get ready for it.
Yeah, I think a part of it is just, for us, a significant part of it is the shame of the whole thing. We're pretty crippled by it.
Just before the detective wraps up the interview, he asks Nick point blank whether he killed his wife.
Nick, part of me wants to ask you this question. Did you have anything to do with this?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
All right.
Why is there a party that wants to ask that?
Well, Nick, I'm a police officer, okay?
Yeah.
I gotta ask the tough questions, all right? And that's a tough question I gotta ask. There's no easy way to do it. And the information you gave me and everything going on out here, I'd be a bad cop if I didn't ask that question. And that's the reason why I have to ask it.
3 hours into the interview, the detective wraps it up, and Nick leaves the station with his family. Because of this tragic incident, the eviction was postponed and Nick was given more time to move out. Over the following weeks, detectives pushed forward with the investigation, but hit a dead end at every turn. A next-door neighbor told police that he heard gunshots that morning and looked out of his window, but didn't see anyone outside. K-9 units were brought to the scene, but couldn't track a scent. Emails between the couple revealed that Nick explained to his wife that the reason they were receiving calls from debt collectors was due to fraud on their account, and that he was working with the bank to get the issue resolved. Another indicator that she had no clue they were in financial trouble. Police wanted to test Nick's claim that he heard someone fiddling with the doorknob and went to the house to see if they could replicate it.
Here we go.
The next step for detectives was to come up with a sketch of the intruder. When they reached out to Nick asking him to work with a sketch artist, they were informed that he was being represented by an attorney and no longer wished to speak with them directly. Nick's attorney declined detectives' offer to have him sit with a sketch artist and instead hired one privately. Just over 2 weeks after Heidi's death, Nick and his lawyers went down to the station and handed them the sketch. The sketch was released to the media to ask for the public's help in identifying the suspect, but no leads came in and the case went cold for years. Each year on the anniversary of Heidi's death, the media released this sketch, and each year, no promising leads came in. That is, until 2015. Someone saw the sketch on the news and called the tip line. The name they gave was Michael Pye. Police ran a background check on him, and it looked like they finally got the break they've been looking for. Michael Pye was a known criminal in the local area and had a long rap sheet that consisted of multiple charges for burglaries and home invasions throughout St. Paul. His MO was breaking into homes during early morning hours while residents were still in bed, exactly like what happened with Nick and Heidi. And most striking was his resemblance to the sketch that Nick had produced 5 years prior. This had to be him. However, there was just one problem. On the morning that Heidi Firkus was shot and killed in her kitchen, Michael Pye was serving a prison sentence for another burglary he had previously committed. There was absolutely no way it could have been him, and Michael had to be ruled out as a suspect. Police were back to square one, and the case was back to being cold. But this wouldn't be the case for much longer. A few months after Heidi's death, a very close friend of Heidi's introduced Nick to her sister, a woman by the name of Rachel Watson. Rachel had just gone through a difficult divorce at the time and had just returned to St. Paul to be closer to her family. Nick and Rachel developed a relationship and supported each other through the difficulties they were both facing. They started dating, and just a year after they met, they made it official and married. Over the following years, Nick was able to gradually pay off his debts, and with the help of his parents, he and his new wife were able to buy their own home. They went on to have 3 children together, and things were finally looking up for the young couple. Nick and Rachel were able to move on from their troubled pasts and were given a second chance at life. However, according to Rachel, after a few years into their marriage, the relationship between her and Nick started to wane. She said that there was no longer a connection between them and that she started noticing some strange behavior from Nick. She said that he would compulsively lie to her about small things. Things like finding out that Nick would eat out after they agreed to save money to support their growing family by eating at home. But Rachel would soon find out that it wasn't just small things that he was keeping from her. One day, she discovered something in Nick's sock drawer that she found to be very troubling. It was a letter from the county clerk notifying Nick that he was delinquent on property taxes for their house and that they were facing a possible foreclosure. Up to that point, Rachel never doubted whether or not Nick was involved in Heidi's murder, but this sounded all too familiar. She thought, if Nick was lying about this, then what else could he be lying about? This frightened Rachel enough to grab her kids and leave the house in the middle of the night. After separating from Nick for a while, Rachel decided that she needed to confront him about this and brought a friend with her to go talk to him. As she sat down to speak with him, her phone was in her lap, recording the conversation.
I could get through this if it was just the lying. I really could. The problem is the Heidi stuff. That's my problem. The problem is I don't 100% believe you. I know it's shocking for you to hear that from me, and it's shocking. Trust me, it's shocking for me to think it.
I don't know what to say right now. So I intellectually understand what you're saying. The fact that you're saying it is so indescribably jarring to my soul that I can hardly breathe. I don't have words, Rach. It is too traumatic, and I don't know what else to tell you.
The fact that you're lying was so easy for you to do in front of me over and over and over makes me think
that I could murder my wife.
That you could lie about something.
That I could murder my wife.
Yes.
There are 100 things going through my mind right now.
Are you wanting to say more?
I probably need to know. I think I'll be open to this conversation. I just can't do it tonight.
By 2019, Rachel divorced Nick. When St. Paul police got wind of the divorce, they asked Rachel to cooperate with them to help build a murder case against her now ex-husband, and Rachel agreed. The case was reopened, and police were determined to gather enough evidence to convict Nick of murder. In the early morning hours of May 19, 2021, over a decade after Heidi was shot dead, police arrived at Nick's residence and placed him under arrest for first and second-degree murder. Prosecutors now needed to prove to 12 jurors beyond any reasonable doubt that Nick did in fact intentionally murder Heidi back in 2010, and the trial was anything but cut and dry.
Nicholas Firkus is now charged with second-degree murder for the shooting death of his then-wife. He'd claimed he'd heard somebody breaking into their St. Paul home in April of 2010, grabbed his shotgun and told Heidi to call 911, that as she was on the phone, intruders came in the front door, and as he struggled with them, the shotgun went off, hitting her in the back. According to the complaint, there is no significant background noise on the call, no sound of intruders or a struggle, nor does Heidi say anything that would suggest an intruder had actually entered the home. But when Nicholas Firkus called 2 minutes later, police can be heard entering the house.
Nick's trial was set for January 27, 2023. Prosecutors alleged that Nick and Heidi were living beyond their means and that Heidi was completely unaware of this. Nick handled all of their finances, including the mortgage they couldn't afford, which was in his name. Heidi's parents insisted that had she known about these problems, she would have definitely told them, especially when she and Nick were about to be thrown out of their house. The jury was told about how police scoured all emails and texts between Nick and Heidi and couldn't find a single mention of the foreclosure. They were also shown footage of the home with everything still in its place, as if they had no idea they were about to be evicted within 24 hours, and the video of officers testing the doorknob to see if it could be heard from upstairs. It was alleged that Nick had financially dug himself in a hole that he couldn't get out of, and instead of asking someone for help, he just kept sweeping everything under the rug. When he could no longer ignore his problems or hide them, prosecutors said that he staged a home invasion to murder his wife and tried to blame it on a man he saw in local newspapers who was arrested for similar break-ins. Had Michael Pye not been in prison that day, he may have very well paid the price for this murder. Instead of facing his problems and being humiliated in front of his extended family and his community, Nick was instead hailed as a hero and ended up being a widower who everyone empathized with and supported. Prosecutors presented evidence to back up this theory. The table right behind the door, along with everything resting on top of it, were all completely undisturbed when police arrived at the scene, which wasn't consistent with the story of two grown men fighting for their lives right next to it. The shotgun was thoroughly swabbed, and the only DNA found on it belonged to Nick. None of the police canines could pick up a scent, and the neighbor who heard the shots and immediately looked out of his window didn't see anyone running away from the house. The defense argued that if Nick was in fact trying to keep his problems a secret, the last thing he would have done was to involve the police and have them look closely into his life. They said that there was no way Heidi was oblivious to their financial situation and pointed to the fact that piles of mail were found in the house filled with letters from debt collectors. They also pointed out that police seized 3 screwdrivers from Nick's house and couldn't match any of them to the marks left in the door frame. They claimed that the table by the door was undisturbed because the struggle happened closer to the stairs as reflected by the pellets in the door. And the lack of DNA was explained by the intruder wearing gloves and having only spent a few seconds inside the home. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and on February 10, 2023, the case was handed to the jury to decide whether or not Nick was guilty of murdering his wife. It took them just 4 hours to return with a unanimous decision. Nicholas Firkus was found guilty of first and second-degree murder. Nick's sentencing was on April 13, 2023. After Heidi's loved ones read out their victim statements in court, Nick was also given a chance to speak.
While I understand the jury's verdict and the sentence you must give, I do maintain and will maintain to my dying breath my innocence of this crime.
Nicholas Firkus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at Minnesota Correctional Facility in St. Cloud and continues to maintain his innocence.